I watched the 1998 NBA Finals Game 6, so you don't have to. I obviously did not watch these games live. However, I'm going to give you a nice evaluation of the first half. All my thoughts, opinions, and just things that I noticed throughout the game. Stay tuned in the coming days for the second half recap. So the first thing I want to mention is that Howard Eisley, who was on the Utah Jazz, was dealing with vertigo, which sounds so tough. And he was playing, but like to play with vertigo, that sounds crazy. And then on Scottie Pippen's first basket of the game, his back started hurting and it was hard for him to run up the floor. And I could tell, even though they said that, I could tell because there was a rebound like a couple plays later that he didn't even jump for. Like, you could tell he just was not going to jump. Eventually in the first quarter, he went to the locker room and he didn't come back out in the first half. Like, he did not play, and they reported that he said that he couldn't play. Now let's get on to things that I noticed in the game itself. So first of all, I want to talk about John Stockton because, as we know, John Stockton is the all-time leader in assists, and obviously he holds that record for a reason. I'm not going to lie, John Stockton kind of reminds me of TJ McConnell. Now let me just clarify by saying I am not saying that TJ McConnell is as good of a player as John Stockton was. I am not saying that at all, even though TJ McConnell, let's talk about it, he's always a solid player everywhere he goes. John Stockton is obviously a legendary player for a reason, but I'm just saying watching him play, like besides his passing, the way that he did like a baseline drive to the basket, it looked like TJ McConnell to me. So that was just something I noticed about John Stockton. They kind of had like similar play, similar speed in a way, like not exactly, but just like, I don't know, let me know if you see the similarities. One thing that really bothered me, and I don't know if this was happening when they were playing it live on TV or whatever, but during the game, they kept taking the score off, and I kept forgetting what the score was, and that really annoyed me. Like, they would put it on after someone scored, but then they would take it off again, and then they would put it on and take it off. Like, I'm like, just leave the score there so I can read it. But I don't know if that's just because I'm watching it on replay, but like, if that was going on during the live game, that would really annoy me. One thing I noticed is that I felt like they were scoring a lot, but they actually weren't. Like, the game was actually moving really slow compared to today's NBA games. And obviously the scoring was different back then, so it makes sense. But we were like 6 minutes left in the quarter and the score was like 12-8. And I'm like, I feel like they scored like 10 more baskets than that, but they didn't. I don't know. It felt so slow, but so fast at the same time. Like, I don't know. It felt like they were scoring more than they actually were. Like, the time seemed to be ticking off the clock, probably because I couldn't see it, because they kept taking the score away. That's probably why. Once it got down to like the last 2 minutes of the first quarter though, Michael Jordan and Karl Malone started imposing their will. Because the first 8 minutes or so, like, they both took a couple of shots, but it just seemed like they weren't really scoring much, but then they started to take over. And let me just say about Karl Malone, because I obviously, again, didn't watch him play live. Obviously, I know stuff about Karl Malone, but I never watched his game, like, in depth. So, like, the fact that I'm watching him, like, super in depth so I can give you guys, like, an in-depth recap, like, listen, he was dominating. He just seemed like he was more powerful and too big for everybody. Like, he would just push people out of the way. And I know you're probably going to be like, well, yeah, Karl Malone was a big man. But I'm telling you, like, if you just watch the game, like, he just looks bigger than everybody. I don't know. It was just, like, shocking to me just how much bigger he looked than everybody. Like, even if he wasn't exactly taller than everybody, like, I don't know how to explain it. He just looked bigger. It just looked pretty obvious to me. If you want to talk about someone with a silky smooth jumper, let's talk about Michael Jordan. Because again, like I said, the first half of the first quarter, both him and Karl Malone like didn't seem to be scoring that much or imposing their will that much. But especially when we got to the second quarter, it was Karl Malone or Jordan. Well, obviously Karl Malone sat for a little bit of the second quarter, and so did Jordan. But when they came back in, Jordan was hitting jumper after jumper. He hit 3 threes in the first half, by the way. Like, he was making stuff. Every time that Chicago needed a bucket, he was making it. And it was cash, cash, cash. I was like, ooh, that is silky smooth. Here's the thing, though. Obviously, I know the outcome prior to watching the game. So, like, maybe that, you know, makes my opinion different. But I was watching the game, and the Utah Jazz were getting a lot of the shots they wanted. They were making a lot of shots. And they played like really good basketball the first half. And oppositely, I thought the Chicago Bulls looked kind of shaky, especially in the first quarter. And the second quarter, obviously Jordan picked up the slack and he was scoring like crazy because he had like, 15, 17 in the second quarter. But even besides that, they had 4 illegal defense calls on them. Like, they were making silly mistakes, and it just seemed like they didn't play their best basketball, like in my opinion. And the Utah Jazz were playing pretty good basketball. And they were only up like 2 majority of the game, or the majority of the first half rather. So the fact that the Utah Jazz did not have a significant lead, as a Utah Jazz fan, I was like, they were probably scared because you only had a 2-point lead with how well you played. Again, maybe me knowing the outcome changes my opinion, but I was watching, like I said, and I was like, listen, they played I don't know if they played the best they could have ever played, but they played well enough that they should have been up at least 10 points. And Chicago was right there with them the whole time. And you have to know that Michael Jordan's going to come out in the second half firing because he is not going to go down without a fight. So I was watching and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of scared for Utah, even though obviously I know what happens. But I'm saying, like, if I was in the moment, I would have been scared for Utah. And they didn't go to review it because, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously I was not watching back then, but they didn't have replay review. Like, am I wrong about that? Maybe they did, I don't know. But they didn't go to replay review for that call. So, you know, that could have been a big call. Well, it was a big call, and we don't know. To further my point, Antoine Carr was also playing really well in the first half too. Like, him and Karl Malone were getting the shots they wanted. Like, it seemed not easy, but pretty easy in the sense that they were getting the shots they wanted and they were making them. Again, there's no Scottie Pippen. He's in the locker room since halfway through the first quarter, maybe a little bit before that. Like, he's been in the locker room. He's saying he can't play. Oh, one other thing I want to say is that Howard Isley, actually, a person who has vertigo, shout out to him for playing with vertigo because that's got to be tough. But he had made a 3 when the shot clock had expired, and it was actually good, but they called it no basket. And if he had made that 3, and well, he made the 3, but if they had counted it, the Utah Jazz would have been up 7. This was in the second quarter. But that's my first half analysis. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and stay tuned for the second half analysis. Let me know, were you watching this game live? Do you remember like all these things that I'm talking about from the game? Maybe you want to go back and watch the game, because it is very interesting to see basketball back then compared to obviously today's basketball. Because if you're looking for a 125 point scoring game, you're not going to get that. But yeah, so let me know in the comments down below.